episode of Mother-Daughter Earthcast. We are here with the amazing Melina Sempill Watts, who is the author of Tree, and it is such a magical book, to be honest, and my mom and I have had such a fun time reading it. Before we get carried away, Melina, welcome to the show. Thanks for being here with us.
I love your show, and I'm so delighted to be a part of it today. Thank you.
Thank you. And we have actually already had the pleasure of having a little chit chat with Melina a couple of weeks ago. So I feel like we're already friends. And so this makes it so much better. But
I think kind of kindred spirits.
Kindred spirits, yes. Mom and Melina went off on a tangent about Mexican cooking and living on ranches. So we've gotten all the kindred spirit out of the way.
The way you're wearing your hair today with the part in the middle and pulled back, it's totally classic ranchera. Like you look like you're ready for your horse with the silver reins to gallop past me, you know?
See, Mom? See? The little, I'm with it. Anyway, Melina, we obviously want to talk all about you and your amazing book, Tree. And to get us kicked off, can you tell listeners a little bit about you, your background, and how you were inspired to write your book, Tree?
Well, I will. I grew up a number of different places, like a lot of people. And then when I was age 7, we moved back to California to a place called Topanga. And at the time, I thought Virginia, where we lived for 2 years, which had a stable with beautiful horses that I got to ride, um, was this perfect place. And I was kind of like shocked by how different the ecosystem was and the culture. And I just, I felt very dispaysé, right? So that first night, I went to sleep in our brand new house in a tract home. Think early Spielberg, right? Like the houses in E.T. I heard coyotes in the mountains, right? And I had thought coyotes were like something that happened to Laura Ingalls Wilder. I thought they were like really you had to live out in a ranch or something to have that. And so realizing that these coyotes were like right outside my house was so exciting. And I woke up and I looked at the mountains in a new way, right? Because I realized we were living in the middle of a wild place. And there's this experience when you're a kid, if you aren't being introduced to native plants along the way, where you drive through nature or walk through the woods and it feels magical and this sort of all coming in at you at the same time, beautiful way of different colors of green and brown. And it's almost like more than you could take, right? And then at a certain point, if you choose to start upping your game and learning the names of the plants and learning their life histories, right? And how they interrelate and getting the ecosystem, it's like becoming friends with them. Like you start to get to know them and you start to see how they fit in together. And the more you know about an individual plant and the next plant and the next plant, the more the ecosystem becomes this incredibly rich story of all these lives interrelated living together at once. And so my story of growing up Topanga is really the process of me falling in love with that ecosystem and that community, right? Um, and does that answer your question?
Yes, it does. And
Okay.
I'm just like starstruck right now because it's so funny. This came up during a recent interview where the realization that as a child, I think my life has kind of been inverted. As a child, I did grow up in nature and I was surrounded by it. We grew up on a ranch in Mexico, as we were talking about the other day, but I was so self-absorbed and just so focused on like dressing up and painting myself with glitter and like doing all these other things that nature, I didn't necessarily feel that strong connection that I feel like is easier to feel as a child, except for my rock collection. But it hasn't been until I've been older that I've really like that kind of magical feeling of taking it all in and kind of really feeling connected to the like native ecosystems has happened to me. And so I always love hearing people's experiences as a child because for some reason that just wasn't my personal experience for some reason.
Even though she was out in nature
all
the time.
All the time. And my mom would take us hiking and whatnot, and I was just walking, just not taking anything in. I don't know.
What my thing is, I don't think any of us can say what even you can say what you were taking in.
That's true.
Because it was so a part of your life that you took it for granted in the same way that a happy kid takes their mom or dad for granted, right? Because they're just there and they feed you and they're awesome and whatever, you're busy.
That's true.
And so it's almost like you had to get removed from nature to go, oh my goodness, there's this hole that I'm missing. What is it? Oh, it's you. And then you turn around and see nature in a different way, right?
That's it,
Maybe.
Melina.
Melina, you literally just like plugged a hole that has been in my life for a long time, I think. You're genius. I would love to think that. It's true.
I think it's true. I think it's true.
Okay, my next question is, you had this awesome experience with your native ecosystem and, the Topanga area. How did you get the idea to write a book from the perspective of a tree as opposed to, and it's something that you have talked about in some other interviews, from a biocentric perspective as opposed to an anthropocentric perspective. That was a mouthful.
Yes.
Right. Well, maybe you picked up on it from me talking about moving to California when I was 7, and a lot of moving as a child. I was a little bit shy, and I made friends, but the constant changing of schools and things. I was often really lonely, right? And so when you're lonely, your heart is sort of forced open by the loneliness, and they say the crack is where the light comes in, right? And so, um, I feel that allowed me to feel plants and animals when I was outside walking, because I was in such deep solitude that it just poured in, and I felt mutually in love with, right? The ecosystem of the Santa Monica Mountains where I grew up. So when I was in high school, I went to the all-girl high school in Marlboro, which is the oldest school in Los Angeles County, or the oldest private school in Los Angeles County. And there are a lot of really smart, interesting people. So even though I didn't do that well academically, I had a very intellectually and emotionally rich life there, right? And then all my friends, I am not kidding you, every single one of my friend group moved to the East Coast because there's this misbegotten idea back in the day that the good schools are all over there. I'm a UCLA girl, so I would beg to differ. But anyway, the point is, I ended up my freshman year down at UC San Diego before I transferred. And, this is before emails and before Facebook and before cell phones. And I didn't even have a phone in the dorm. So if people didn't write me a letter, it was like they'd been wiped off the face of the earth. Right. So
Right.
I'd get the occasional letter because people are, they care, but they're busy because they're all trying to get that blasted 4.0. So here I am, like, alone. I had a fabulous roommate, actually from Tijuana, in San Diego. She'd grown up both back and forth. And she was away for 3 or 4 days. And I was just feeling, super, super disconnected from other people, super abandoned and alone. And I'm walking back to the dorm, and it's a Friday night, and it's going from sunset to dusk into dark, and music is pouring out of the dorms. And I have no date, no party, no real deep friendships to connect to, no letters in my mailbox. And I really can't take it. I've also realized I'm never going to be a doctor because I'm terrible at math. And I had thought that would be a way to give meaning to life, to help people, right? So I'm like thinking, what am I doing? Why am I here? Who cares if I'm here? If I can't even be, like, even a tiny bit content, I don't know how much more I could take this. So I was doing that kind of depressed downward spiral of really, really feeling this dark siren song of suicidalness, right? And I just couldn't go inside. So I lay down on the grass, and it was like this big quadrant, a very ordinary green lawn looking, just, large lawn, surrounded all 4 sides by all these big dorms full of people who were not me. And I thought, I can't give in. I can't give up. My dad would die if I died. So that was like my lifeline, but it still didn't feel like enough to, like, get me through the night, really,
Yeah.
So while I'm lying there, this individual blade of grass right in front of me, it kind of feels my sorrow and pops some energy at me, for lack of a better word for it. And it feels like getting hit in a good way by a ray of light. And I was completely startled, and I kind of emoted back at the grass and said, "Gosh, hello," and the grass kind of felt energy at me saying, "I'm here, and I care, and I love you." And I was overwhelmed. Like, I had tears in my eyes. I couldn't even take it, right? And then the two grass next to it told them, and they did the same thing. Then they told grass next to it, and the same, and it went from 2 to 50 to 100 to 1,000 to 10,000, 100,000. I don't even know, but the whole field of grass at this point is showering me with love. It's like finding out an orchestra is playing a song just for you. Do you know what I mean? It was overwhelming. And it It was the most ecstatic experience of my life. So I lay there, like, just ebullient, joyful, loving, connected. And I'm trying to emote back and say, thank you. I love you. I hear you. I'm with you, you know? And I lay there and I lay there and I couldn't break the connection until finally it got so cold. I was having trouble feeling my fingers and and I basically said, you know, I love you, goodbye. And I went inside to my room and it kind of stayed with me for my life, you know. And I tried to get a career going in Hollywood, whole different story, save it for another day. And I had gotten a fabulous job working for the Kennedy Marshall Company, as in Kathleen Kennedy, as in she's doing all the Star Wars movies you're watching right now, right? Uh, um, and I'd left them because the Disney funding ran out was the official reason, but the other reason was, you know, they just cycled through people and they were done. You know what I
Yeah.
mean?
Yeah.
And so I ended up with this job that was just not a good fit. That's a charitable way of putting it. My boss made more money than anybody else in the company, so everybody had to love him, but he was a screamer and he was a cusser. And he was always, you know, either charming or upset. There was no middle ground. And I was like, whatever, I'm just going to do my job and take it. So I was an assistant that he could lean on and I wouldn't fall apart. So in his weird way, he really liked me, you know, but it was up the 6th floor in this office with no windows. Well, there were windows in his office, but not in my office, if you know what I mean.
Of course.
So I got him his lunch with the big shot, hopeful new clients, and he took them to Spago's in Beverly Hills. And I knew there'd be like, you know, 50-year-old bottles of wine and God knows what. And he was gone until he was done with them and then he'd go home. But I had to sit at that stupid desk till 6 p.m. And I really had done all my work for the week. So I'm sitting there feeling like, oh my God, can I take the boredom? Like, honestly, right? And all of a sudden, that memory of that field of grass, the spirits of those grass, for lack of a better word, was like, remember us? And I was like, yes. Are you
Yes,
back?
I do.
And then they just kind of retreated, but they put themselves in me. And I thought, have I felt this before? And I remembered going to Yosemite Institute twice, once in 8th grade and once in 11th grade, and these giant trees and the redwoods and feeling the trees in the same way I'd felt the grass, but a completely different language on a different scale. And I thought, you know, for people who aren't as out there as me, it's easier to hear a tree than grass because trees are really loud. Like even the least connected person to nature, you drop them in the middle of the redwood forest and they're going to come home saying, oh my God, right? Every single time.
Right.
So I thought, well, I can't tell the story of a redwood. It's too big. It's too long. It's not me. And then I thought, oh my God, my favorite tree, California live oaks. I've grown up with them. They've always been my friends. I'm going to tell the story of a California live oak. And then it upwelled in me literally the whole story in about 30 seconds. The whole thing. Like there's pieces that change, etc. But I had the Schumacher era, the Ranchero era, the Yankees, the new Hollywood money, the ending, like all of it came. And all I had to do was research it, right? So the next 3 days I wrote like crazy. It was the most joyful experience of my life. And then on around Monday or Tuesday, I thought, you know, I'm gonna need to do some homework. There's so much science, like what is, you know, how does an acorn sprout? How big is the tree in 6 months or a year?
Yeah.
What are the other plants doing at this time? What is the Chumash language and culture? Is it Tongva or Chumash in Topanga? That's a hot topic. I mean, all of it, right? So there was a lot of research, and that was a long answer, but you did ask.
Oh my gosh, that was I think, the most beautiful answer we have received on one of our podcasts ever.
I
ever.
know.
And okay, I know Mom has lots of questions, but I have a follow-up question.
Darn it, I wanted to get my question
Okay,
in
well,
first.
you can.
But it's more of a comment, Mariana. I just love how you explained how Univervia, the Mexican springle grass is
Got it.
one of the main topic or one of the main characters in your book. And I was wondering how you had chosen a grass to be one of the sweetest, kindest, gentlest,
Oh, yeah, and a tearjerker.
characters.
Yeah, that section made me cry. I'm not gonna give it away for anyone who hasn't read the book, but if you have, you know what I'm referring to. The fact that I could feel so much of, you know, care and emotion towards grass was was truly a work of genius. So you definitely brought that through in the book, and I love hearing the backstory, as you were saying, Mom.
Yes.
That was a great comment.
Okay, so go ahead, Mariana.
My follow-up question, which
Was there a question about Univervia that we slipped past that you want to be answered?
No, it was more of a comment that I'm glad to now know how you came up with Univervia.
Oh yeah, where Univervia was born.
Yeah, you just explained it.
You just mentioned something really interesting because, by the way, in the bonus episode for listeners, Mom and Melina are going to talk more about, how they experience communication with nature because Melina, I don't know if we told you in our last conversation, but Mom had to come out of the nature speaking closet too, and that was a process. I was like shoving her out. But you were just saying something really profound, and I wanted to touch a little bit more on it, where you were describing if you put anyone in the middle of a forest, they're going to come back and say, whoa. And you were implying, I thought, that anyone can hear trees and communicate with them. But I want to touch on that a little bit more because I would say the average person, if they do go into a forest or on a hike, can come back out and not realize that what they've experienced is a form of communication with nature, right? They can come back feeling happy and nice and maybe a little energized, but what people don't realize what's happening. So can you expound a little bit on that and say, what is the line between receiving, communicating, or just being in nature? Do you think it all happens at the same time and people just aren't realizing that there's that energetic exchange? Or do you think it just happens differently for different people?
It's going to sound like I'm changing the subject, but I'm not.
Okay, go for it.
Okay.
We're here to learn from you, Melina. You take it wherever you want.
Okay. So I have a son who's going to be 25 in February. And when he was at Our Lady of Malibu School, which is a teeny tiny Catholic school that didn't care that we weren't Catholic, bless their hearts. They had a marvelous Spanish teacher, but they only had money to have her teach like 20-minute classes 2 or 3 times a week. So when you only give a kid 20 minutes of Spanish 2 or 3 times a week, you're lucky if they learn how to say yes, no, book. And what they learn at the end of a year of barely touching Spanish is that, oh, I'm an idiot. I can't learn a foreign language. They're just, it's worse than nothing, in my opinion. Like, either go for it and commit to a solid hour a day or solid 2 hours a day, or just stay home. I don't like this American pretend, throw a couple words at your kid in a foreign language and think you've done your job. Like, no, right?
Yeah.
So when Vincent was going into ninth grade, he got into the school Viewpoint School, which I had actually gone to back in the day. And they had him do a day in the life of kind of all the classes he would be taking. And he was completely opposed to it till he did that. And then he came home and he's like, okay, I'm in, right? But one of the things we experienced on that day was this wonderful guy, Monsieur Vanderbroek. I think he was Belgian, but he was our French teacher. And he was super charismatic, and he took all the parents and the kids. And I, of course, knew some French, so I didn't say anything because I didn't want to spoil the fun, right? And he did like back and forth, and he got them to answer questions in French and understand his basic questions and actually do, like, baby French stuff, right? In the first hour of class. And Vincent came out with his eyes this big and he's like, like it was transformative, like he was going to do it, right? And so cut to the chase, junior year, he gets to go to Europe abroad, and he has this experience where there's this really charming guy who's from North Africa, who's an immigrant, who's his age, right? Who's selling sunglasses on the street and speaks horrible French and Arabic. And Vincent speaks no Arabic and so French. And they were able to become friends. Oh. Because they could get along in their fractured French together. It was beautiful. It was transformative. Like, he came home like, that was worth it, right? So my point is, you take someone who thinks, I can't speak tree, grass aren't talking to me, and you need someone who's Monsieur Vanderbroek, who can sit with them and go, okay, I get it. It's a foreign language. Put your hands on the tree. Do you feel, if you sit there and you say nothing and you sit there long enough and it's not winter where things are frozen and barely moving at all, but it's summer, right? Maybe even better spring. You can feel the sap moving up and down the tree, right?
Mhm.
And then you put your hands out in the sun and you talk about photosynthesis and you imagine your hands as leaves photosynthesizing, and you think that you're making food from light. You're making, and you start like trying to connect to what the tree is doing and feeling and touching the tree and being open to the tree, and you may start to hear it. And I think a lot of times people are so stuck on hiking. I'm going on a hike, I'm going on a walk, I'm moving.
Mhm.
When you're moving, you're not a very good listener to plants, in my opinion.
Mhm.
What you need to, you maybe some people are, I don't know, but to me, you need to sit still, be quiet, and be receptive, right? And the other trick is, plants communicate electrically with each other, right?
Mhm.
So there's this yoga trick where you put your hands like you're going to do the Thai bow thing. We put your hands like together. You put
Mhm.
your hands together and you rub them back and forth until they get really hot, right? And then you put them just an inch away and you go back and forth, and you can almost feel like a tiny ball of energy between your hands, right? When you get that feeling of energy, if you go out in the forest with that energy between you've made from friction in your hands, and you put your hands out and then you sit still, it may be that you can actually feel energy coming to you and from the trees. And so people have to try different routes if they want to, but the act of opening mind, body, heart, soul to the possibility, someone else's access may be completely different than mine, but I can
Mhm.
offer them things that have worked for me. And so that's where, I think there are other people other than me who teach how to communicate with plants that are a better Mr. Vanderbrook than I am.
Well, you're a pretty awesome
Wow.
one.
You explained it so
You
well.
did. And we're going to get more into that into the bonus episode. But I want to pivot, but I'm going to let my mom ask a question first, because otherwise I'm just going to hoard Melina to myself.
No, I love how you make people think of how the world is not about just humans, how we are all interconnected and we're all supposed to live together and thrive together and nourish each other. And that was such a beautiful message from your book, Tree, and which I have never read a book that has that perspective.
Yes, that's the key. You have brought a message that, we hear a lot, but from such a unique perspective that it just hits home. I loved it. Okay, we're gonna pivot a little bit because Melina, y'all, majored in history from UCLA, as she mentioned. And so one of the things that I loved about the book as well, and I want to just get more of your thoughts on, are what your thoughts are on the historical aspect of it. But one of the things I love about the book is that it weaved those little hints of history, even though it was all from the perspective of a tree and viewing history from the perspective of the tree. You really brought that history aspect into it. And I'm going to read a little passage from her book, Tree, because I think this was my favorite one, because it really, this was the part where, to me, it kind of hit home that we're looking at life not, let's look at life and events not just from the perspective of human beings, right? And so this is to give listeners a little bit of context. It's placed, we're now in the time when the first Spanish conquistadores, like conquistadors, like come to the area, and this is the first time they've kind of like been to where Tree is. And this is a little bit afterwards, but it's on page 87 for anyone who has the book. And it says, and the Spanish had left like a trail of mustard seeds, which was super interesting. I'm sure you
Can I
find
just
that little nugget.
can I
Yes,
just
please.
interject? I was
Yes.
taught when I was becoming a naturalist and guiding walks for kids and families that that's a true story, that the conquistadors left a trail of mustard seed to find their way back to the boats. And I found out years later that that's ahistorical. So that is literally the only fact in the book that I can't commit to as being God's own truth.
Well, it's one
But
of
it's
my
such a great
favorite.
story that I'm like, I have to use it. I
You
have to use
have to.
it.
I'm so glad you did. I'm so glad you did. Well, I'm sorry to point out the one fact, but it was one of my favorites.
And I also feel like, for all of us who grew up with, Frank L. Baum and Judy Garland and Wizard of Oz, it's the Yellow Brick Road.
Yeah. Yes. And just the imagery, it was perfect. So
Anyway, I don't mean to interrupt. I'm sorry. I totally interrupted. I'm a
no,
bad.
please. I'm so glad you did. As a reader, I think I'm going to totally give you a pass on the historical accuracy because I like to believe that this is what happens too. But anyways, on page 87, this is a little passage that really struck me. And it says, the mustard path would give the Spanish a roadmap made of plants of the way to go back after a season of exploration. Tree spent a lot of time that summer looking at the new biota, the new grasses. Entire communities of plants bent and retreated before these invaders. Mustard, oats, radish. The world was forever changed. A new color yellow, a new color green, a new world. Man, that just really struck home because we learn about that whole part of history, a literal genocide and cultural genocide and complete overtake of what was there, but we only learn about it from a human perspective, which was tragic, don't get me wrong, and it's massive what happened. But this was the first time, Melina, that I had thought about that time in history from the perspective of what was happening to the ecosystem and the plants and animals, and not just from a large like high level, like, oh, they came and clear cut the forest and you kind of gloss over it. No, but it made it real. It made it like, it really struck home, and it made it feel like what the indigenous communities were feeling, the plants were feeling also. So I'm gonna let you comment. That was just something I wanted to point out for listeners. Like, this is how impactful some of the book as a whole is, but especially some of the passages were for me. It just, I've never, as someone who feels very connected to plants already, the way you worded it was magical. So coming back to an actual question, I would love to hear.
I heard a question in there, but that's okay.
I would love to hear more about how the journey was for you to weave in that historical aspect, and then kind of bring that into, again, from the perspective of the plants, and yet make it historically relevant, and bring all of your historical genius into the book too, because that's a big part of it as well. It's not just plants.
Well, there's two kinds of mainstream history that inform this book. There's, history like you would learn it in school, right? And I was very interested in California history and the First Nations peoples' cultures. I tried to understand so that I could really ground that part of the book. And I was really blessed that a Chumash scholar agreed to read the book, the first part of it, and give me notes on it. And I'm not allowed to mention her name because she has her own book coming out, and her agent says she can't be affiliated with any other books.
Got it.
The draft I got back from her came back with a lot of red. It was super humbling, right? And her comments were so profound because she commented that I had mixed up some elements of the Mexican and South American experience of conquistadors with what was happening in also California, and that Father, I don't know how to say juniper in Spanish, Junipero Serra. I don't know.
I have no idea.
I don't know.
Well, he's was heavily romanticized in earlier eras to as a founding father of California, and now people are like, yeah, they basically enslaved the Indians at the missions. It was awful, right? But when they first came, they were giving presents and they were trying to communicate, and they're, oh, we're going to teach you about the Bible and it's all going to be good, so it was like, so that first contact wasn't terrifying. It didn't get terrifying till later, right?
Yes.
So she said, no, you got to take away the fighting. That's not what happened there. It happened in other places, but not there, which was very helpful. And she was very pleased with something I did get right, which is when the Spanish came, they traveled with not just the horses they were riding, but also cattle and other species, including pigs, on the hoof, because they weren't sure what they'd find wherever they were. And they thought, well, if we have grazing animals with us, we'll just kill them as we go so we won't starve to death, right? And so the pigs got loose and bred. And the problem with this wild pig phenomena, invasive species, right, is almost certainly in the area that I'm talking about in California, but many areas of California, the backbone of the Native American economies, plural, because they're all different nations really from their own perspective, was acorns. And acorns are far healthier than corn or rice or wheat because they're high in fat and they're high in protein compared to regular grains, right? So they would, if everything else went wrong in the world, as long as there was acorns, that they could hang in there, right? And one of the interesting things about the use of acorns by First Nations peoples is they had favorite kinds of trees. But if there was a bad year of the mast, which is the name of the crop, right, the other trees would often overcompensate. It was really interesting, like different kinds of weather conditions favored certain trees. So you had a backup plan. So it was fabulous. But then the pigs came, and to a certain extent, the cattle as well. They ate all the acorns. So when you look at how quickly the missionization process happened, again, think of it as kind of enslavement, really. It's because they were starving because of the stupid pigs, which I don't think was intentional on the Spanish part necessarily. I've never heard that it was, but it made everything else, accelerated everything else, right? Then the other part of history that drives the book is I'm very interested in ecological history, which looks at how different human cultures force ecosystem change, right? And the people who study this stuff are crazy smart because they know all the history stuff, but they also are like massive science geeks. So as an example, when you look at what you're talking about with that part of the book where the ecosystem, the grasses change, they're saying that when they go and they look at the bricks of the earliest missions that we have, the earliest adobe homes, and you pick it apart and you look at the pollens and you look at the seeds, it's already like something crazy, like 95, 98% European species. And
Really?
Yes. In other words, they think that process happened literally before the Spanish got off the boat. And they're saying that the grains that were like dropped on the boat that the birds ate and defecated in the woods, they were so well suited for where we are. They took off that fast, and they dominated. And so it is an ecological tragedy that it happened so quickly. You talk to botanists in California and they're like, yeah, we know a lot about this forest system or the chaparral system, but when you look at the native grass like this in the savanna or in the grasslands, they're like, we're not totally sure because it's so dominated now by European. We can't totally recreate what we think it was. We can guess. We know remaining grasses, but they're all in a tiny minority position compared to what they would have once been.
Wow. Interesting. That I was at a native plant society meeting one day, and there was this gentleman who had written a book about the native plants of the prairies in Texas. And I bought the book and found it fascinating. And there's this one, I can't remember the name of the plant right now, but there's this one plant that is very showy, gets really, really tall. And I happened to see it at one of my customers' homes. And I said, oh, that is the coolest native plant. I just saw this in a book that I bought at the Native Plant Society. Well, I go and I read about the book, and they said, oh yeah, it was used by the Romans, the big stick that it puts forth with the flowers up at the top, that was used by the Romans for torches. And I was thinking, I don't remember any Romans being in Texas. But the point is that that plant had been brought over to Texas so many years ago, it is now considered a native plant. And whenever I speak to people about native plants, I always talk, there's a gray zone there many times, isn't there?
Well, there's a lot of controversy about that. I mean, I definitely know a lot of scientists who are like 100% native or else. And then a lot of people are more like, if it's pretty, I'm good, with it, when you talk about prairie grasses, I'm really intrigued by some of the best remnant prairies are two places. Do you know the answer?
Well, is Dallas one of them? Because we have the Blackland Prairie here.
Actually, I meant, I'm sure it is. What I meant was if you're in any area in the Midwest, where are you going to find them? And the two that they consistently find them are cemeteries.
Oh.
And then the other one is the places where they put aside land for the railway. Because they had to fence out the animals, right?
Yeah.
So people who study them go there first.
That's really interesting.
In fact, the closest original Blackland prairie near our home is attached to a cemetery. In fact,
Oh.
we had a photo shoot there,
We did.
and it's just the plants there are amazing. Yeah,
That's
interesting
really
that you mentioned that.
I've never been on prairie lands. I would love to see it. I mean,
Come over to Dallas.
I would love to.
We put in the Dallas plug anywhere we get.
Yes. Okay, so we're going to need to be wrapping things up. And you had so many interesting, thoughtful messages in your book. But is there one takeaway that you really want people to have when they finish your book?
And in addition to that, is there anything in general that you would like to share that we haven't asked, or that other people who interview you about your book haven't asked, but you really want to get that message out there? So either from your book or just in general.
Well, there's two things. One is that the way that history is taught in California, and I would presume elsewhere in America, but I've seen it here to kids, they teach it like a layer cake, where there's the First Nations people, then there's the Spanish came, but then they become Mexican, and then there's the Yankees, and then there's us, whatever us is, right? And what I discovered from my research was, first of all, it was never that simple, right? Because the First Nations cultures was as complicated as a map of Europe times 100, because you had, 400 languages or something unbelievable. I think that's right. And each of them had, stories and relationships. And the average person back then spoke maybe 6 languages. So it was very, expectation was that you would be able to travel and connect and deal with people near you, right? So then when you had the Spanish came, the first settlement in Los Angeles, they listed them by ethnicity, and you can see it posted in Olvera Street. It's actually in the tiles, and more than half of them were African descent and or Native American descent, and very few of them were, Spanish only, and many of them were mestizo. So California's always had a much more complicated rainbow of history than is acknowledged. And those cultures are still alive and present and a part of our current reality. And they make us who we are, this wonderful melange. I joke that it's like more like, instead of like a layered cake, it's more like confetti cake, where it's all mixed up together, right? And I hope that comes across in the book, that feeling of the joy of all these cultures all at the same time. The other thing that I would say is the most important thing, if you take anything from this book, is human beings have done so much to destroy nature on so many levels in so many ways. If you want to heal nature, plant a native plant.
I love that. And it's true.
The first step.
True.
There's a lot of other stuff to do, but it's always the best first step.
Well, this segues into our final question, which Mom asks all of our guests. So it might be your answer, but you might want to add something to it. So, Mom?
So, Melina, what is the most important thing that you think each individual can do to help reverse global warming?
We need to stop being so self-centered and being anthropocentric and us, and people and oh no, and start thinking of the whole of nature and the whole of the world. If we care about other plants and animals as much as we care about our own children and our own future, we will do the right thing.
Oh, so true, Melina. You nailed it.
Melina, you inspire me. You make my heart go pitter patter. I love that. It's so true.
It is. You really that's it.
It is. And it's one of the reasons. So we've mentioned this in podcasts before, but just, wrap things up. But one of our main messages as Mother Daughter Earth this year, the first one is connect with nature. Because when we started looking at everything we had learned about living sustainably and all of the awesome things, we really were like, how do we boil it down? And the first one had to be connect with nature, because you can't protect something you don't care about, and you can't care about something you don't feel a connection to, right? And that just goes, you said it so much more eloquently, but it's so true. I mean, we have to think and consider beings that aren't humans when we're making our decisions, and it all starts there, and then from there everything else can grow. So
you love it, you'll save it.
Yes. Melina, Thank you so, so much. You are inspiring. Your book touched me in so many ways. And everyone go get a copy of Tree by Melina Sempill Watts. It's amazing and it is really life-changing. It really is. So thank you for being with us and for spending the time to chat with us today. We really appreciate it.
Caquinas, gracias, and thank you.
Yes,
Aw.
yay. Okay.
Thank you for your time and your expertise, Melina. We're very blessed to have you on our podcast.
Until next time, Melina.